I can't stomach, folks, MPs gloating over locking up young lads raised in a system. This has happened online. We've seen MPs and police actually reporting this in a gloating fashion. It tells them that they're worthless. During the Black Lives Matter riots, the left justified thuggery to highlight injustice. I disagreed with that then, and I do now. But where are those voices today? The working class is ignored, lied to and left struggling. These lads snap and, well, would just throw away the key. I think it's a disgrace. Would it have killed a Labour government minister, purportedly the party of Labour, the working class, to acknowledge the reason for the rage? Instead, we throw them in the slammer and move on. And we do after every atrocity committed on our soil. We just move on. It's too uncomfortable for the established media, MPs and two-tier police forces to discuss. Who'll fight for this country if, God forbid, we ever went to war? Do you think it would be the neglected young lads or the woke brigade cheering on calls for violence in a sea of Palestinian flags? I know who my bet's on. Well, who do I start with here? Eunice, what do you think?
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head because...
We'll end the show there.
Because I said the exact same thing when the BLM riots were going on, and there were people, vandalizing statues, and they were, looting shops, and they were setting buildings on fire. And I remember I made a post about it on my social media, and at the time I was in uni, and basically my uni sent me an email saying, we've heard you put racist posts on your story. And I was thinking, what was racist about it? I'm all for protest. OK, if you want to protest racial injustice, all power to you. But you can't be vandalizing statues of Churchill, and you can't be looting shops, and you can't be setting buildings on fire. And it was ironic because the protests were going on here, and the police here don't really have any guns. And you can say there was some racial injustice in this country, but mostly it was in America. And as you said, there is a two-tier policing and there is a two-tier mainstream narrative where when a minority protests, there's rights and they can do anything. They can literally get away with murder. But if a patriotic person fights for their country, all of a sudden they're racist. And I just don't buy that at all.
Benjamin, do you buy that?
There is no justification, no political argument that can explain the behaviour that has happened in the last week and a half. Many of these people were not sat at home mulling over immigration and then went out to do this. I was reading today one person was convicted having stolen £4,000 worth of vapes, which is enough to keep you going for days. Many of these were just thugs trying to loot on the back of it. There was a story that's quite funny, really, of two people that had been out for an afternoon bingo, and then they clearly had too much to drink, and then they decided to throw bricks at police.
No, they didn't.
They were convicted of that.
Shouted in the face of the police. That's what he did after bingo.
Let me put it in terms they'll understand. Police at the door, 44. I think that's how you explain it to them. But do you know what? Not you, but people that have rioted in the last week and a half have done more to shut down questions and debates about immigration than anybody on the left like me could ever do, because now people see the thuggery and they associate it with the race.
So is there no part of you then that looks at what's happening and thinks, oh my goodness, we haven't listened to anybody, because every single politician in this country who's elected today, who's been in there more than one parliament, I think has totally ignored and taken for granted the voters. 2010, obviously that was a Conservative government. We voted for the tens of thousands immigration. 2015, 2017, 2019, 2024. Keir Starmer said he'd stop the boats. Well, that doesn't seem to be going very well. It's at record levels so far. So all of these things we are just consistently ignored by an arrogant political class.
You think throwing a brick through the window of grace is the answer?
But I'm saying that people on your side of politics made that argument during Black Lives Matter.
Only 8% of people think there's any justification for these.
Well, it's funny you should say that, Benjamin. It's funny you should say that. It's funny you should say that. Do you disagree with Rachel Reeves, then? Do you disagree with Rachel Reeves? Because she came out and said... Well, I'm surprised you didn't know that. In 2016, she came out and said if we don't do something about immigration now, there will be rioting and violence on the streets. You disagree with her, do you? You said there was no political statement that could justify it. Do you disagree with her?
If you think that justifying...
Answer the question. Do you disagree with her?
I know you're an arrogant swine online, but
you might not like having being checkmated, but you disagree with Rachel Reeves. Then that's good to know. So look, let's get to the reality of the issue here. No one wants violence on the streets, Benjamin. Nobody wants violence. But what's happened is, for 14 years, people in this country have not had their voices heard. They have elected Conservative governments in 4 elections and had 1 historic referendum, in which time the people were promised they'd have lower immigration time and time again. And what's happened? It's just gone up. And people like Keir Starmer and people on the left continue to ignore those people at their own peril.
And Claire, put yourself in the position of these young lads, right? Their job prospects, we've got mass migration coming into this country in levels we've never, ever seen before. In fact, it's unprecedented, really, around the world, even. 2 million people went over the southern border of America, and they said, oh, my goodness, well, we had that over the last few years in legal migration. And then you consider the fact that they can't get on the housing market. If you want to get your kids into school, you're struggling with class sizes, and Sir Keir Starmer's just made that even worse through getting rid of, making it harder for private schools to actually function. So all of these things, their prospects ain't great. Would you accept that?
Yeah, I do accept that, and I don't think the cause of this is migration. I think that is one side of it, and it's quite interesting when you look at those young people taking part in these riots, because that's what they're doing. What are they asking for? Because they can't seem to get across an actual message as to what it is they're very angry about. They're obviously very angry about something. And politicians, elected representatives of all levels have never managed to boil down what are the underlying causes. Now, migration is going to be one of them, and if you are in certain areas, you will have a certain view of it. But also, I think this is largely education. We need to educate, especially boys. Now, I have a teenage boy. So I'm very acutely aware of this. I think that we need to take education a lot more seriously in this country. Don't write people off just because they come from perhaps a more poverty-stricken background. Actually look at what they can do, look at the apprenticeships they can do. And I think if you start to give people belief in themselves, they will stop taking on this kind of anger, because at the moment they're written off as just useless.
Yeah.
They're not, they're talented.
They've been written off by the government, haven't they?
But multiple governments.
Multiple governments, correct, yes, correct.
It really is multiple.
I agree, Claire.
Don't bother applying. To be honest with you, I think university these days is, for most people, is quite the waste of time. But I remember one teacher saying, oh, don't bother applying, that'll never happen.
Well, there's job descriptions that are put up by TfL that said need not apply if you're a white English boy.
That's also another point.
Straight boy.
Yeah. ITV had that Robert Peston's flagship show. Poor Benjamin was eager to apply but couldn't get on the list.
I'm still hoping for my big break.
Yeah. Have you got what it takes to be a reasoned presenter? Well, send us a short clip of yourself to join@reasoned.uk and we might be seeing you on this very channel very soon indeed.